2 weeks ago I released a video called How Jagex Can Fix the Wilderness, where I went over the problems the wilderness had and content to fix it. Yes, I know it's a really long video, especially given its nature, which, you know, game design or whatever, but people seem to like it quite a bit, and as such there were a lot of comments, which is why I am here today to answer some of them, or comment on them, if you will. I did not include every single comment, so you can, go to the original video and read them if you want, but I did check every single one, I read every single one, so thank you if you took the time to leave a comment, even if they are not that great. So yeah, in this video I'm mostly gonna just be reading the comment and sort of responding to it. It's not gonna be anything super fancy or anything like that, so you can probably put this on the background and just hear me yap about it. So without further ado, let's actually get into the comments. First up, we have, I think the problem with the wilderness comes down to the fact that the players have optimized the fun out of everything. Way back in the day, everyone was kids playing and knew nothing about all the advanced PvP tactics that exist today, so in a sense it felt like everyone was on the same level, and it was much more likely for someone to take a chance at PvP, since everyone was equally as bad. Nowadays the skill gap between seasoned players and anyone that doesn't PvP is so wide that if you don't basically do a lot of studying / practicing beforehand, you will immediately just get comboed out for 100 plus damage by every combat style without even being able to react, and to a lot of people that's just not fun. Now, while skill plays a part in the fun players can have, I don't find it to be a satisfactory explanation for the current generalized uninteresting or disinterest towards the wilderness and its PvP component. Competitive games tend to have ladders for sure, but they also show that even when players get beaten they still keep playing. Fun isn't just related to winning or being good at something, it's related to doing the activity itself and improving on it. Progression is also a big part of the game, as with any MMORPG, and it's essentially one of the main motivators that leads players to slowly become better at it. This is just lacking in the wilderness and overall PvP, and it's essentially what I decided to focus on. The argument surrounding skill also doesn't really correlate to how things would work, since more incentives to go to the wilderness also means less skilled players frequenting the zones, which would help balance the skill levels. Most competitive games, the people that are really good at the game tend to be like the top 1 to 2% of players. Like the vast majority of players is usually low elo because, they're not as talented at the game. Essentially, the more incentives you have for people to go into the wilderness, the more people that are, I guess, quote-unquote low elo you will have in the wilderness, which makes fights actually way more balanced rather than less. That's sort of the problem with making content that is so skewed to the top half of the people that are really good at the game, is that essentially forgetting the bottom half, but the bottom half makes the vast majority of the players, and that's why you should have content in the wilderness that pushes people to go there and interact with it, and even if they're not that good, the interaction is what is fun for them, right? This is exactly one of the main reasons as to why I try to create scenarios that are kind of chaotic in nature as well, so even if a player is more skilled than you in a chaotic environment, for example, I think I called it the first, someone else called it the cage, which is actually a really good name, but if you have, say, 10 players all competing against each other, right, and the last person standing wins, if a player is really skilled, everyone is going to jump on top of you, everyone is going to want to kill you because you're much better than everyone else, right? So these type of chaotic environments essentially make it so you might still be able to kill those players without them even having a chance to fight you at all, right? There's many ways to incentivize people to do something they are bad at, so I don't think the skills some high-level players display is an issue substantial enough to consider as the main reason as to why the wilderness and PvP isn't that active. And again, the wilderness already has plenty of PKers that aren't necessarily skilled at PvP, they just fight targets that don't usually fight back, so I don't really consider this to be an argument at all. Next comment. Your fix has one massive flaw. the same flaw Bounty Hunter Worlds had. Remember all the people standing in edge banks selling kills? That's going to happen again to obtain these rewards. Tying it to G value is also a no-go, which Jagex understood in Bounty Hunter. They tied it to item value, which is terribly low. Highly inflated items like the 1-dose obscure potions used by scammers would let you skip all the content for a tiny fraction of the price, hence you cannot use G value. Also, any fix including Predator vs Prey is not a PvP fix. It's an addition to the current system and not encouraging players fighting each other. It's fun for about a day, then the inconvenience pushes more legit players away and leaves bots and gold farmers there. So let's start with obvious. I never said Predator vs Prey was a fix for PvP. Like, in fact, I spent like 15 minutes detailing why it wasn't and why progression was one of the main issues with PvP in the wilderness. So I don't understand that part of the video, or the comment rather. As for the flaw, I stated in the original video as well that any system that the game introduces is going to be abused, right? In fact, many skilling and PVM areas are memed on due to how well known they are for just being botting grounds, right? This is in no way exclusive to PvP or the wilderness. People already sell LMS services, for example, Chambers of Xeric services, amongst other types of services, and yes, I do know that when I was writing this, they did update it, so Chambers boosting isn't as good anymore. I think you can still do it. I've seen some people say they can still do it, but they attempted to fix that. But still, you know, those services still exist. You can still get a kill very easily on your low-level Iron Man, for example, in order to do the diaries or whatever. You know, but I don't see people being against those pieces of content just being in the game or being designed for the game because they can be abused. I think it's important to understand that there's a difference between content that is unbalanced and content that is going to be abused. Because every piece of content can be abused potentially if players try hard enough. Every piece of content can essentially just have bots or can have people selling services or whatever, right? What makes it really bad for the wilderness is that most of the content there is unbalanced. The drop tables are way too generous, which is why most people botting focus on the wilderness and botting in the wilderness. Now, lastly and more importantly, Bounty Hunter was an additional system to incentivize Edgeville PKing specifically. My system isn't the same, like in any way, shape or form. When I compared it to Bounty Hunter, what I meant is that you had an additional system in the wilderness that would reward you on top of the regular loot you already get, which is something that only Bounty Hunter did, which is why I compared it to Bounty Hunter. My system and Bounty Hunter aren't the same thing. Functionally they are different, since my system is all about destroying items you end up PKing, which is a major difference with Bounty Hunter, where people could generate loads of GP without needing to sacrifice anything, because you would just essentially generate statues out of anything. No items would need to leave the game in order for those statues to be generated. That was why Bounty Hunter was so abused. Under my system, if you want to generate any type of points, the item needs to leave the game. Like, it needs to be destroyed. It's the same thing as Invention in RuneScape 3. If you want to get any type of perks and components to make those perks, you need to destroy the items. There's no way around it, right? It's a trade you're making. You know, that's why it's not the same thing at all. At least with my system, even if it gets abused, you are having the trade of at least that item is leaving the game. Even if it's some obscure item or whatever, if you do that trade of killing the player with that item that is supposed to be really valuable or whatever, that's the trade-off. That item gets destroyed. You can just pick it up and then give it to, your next account and PK your next account. That doesn't happen. That item just gets destroyed, which inevitably is gonna fuck up with the prices. It's gonna get to a point where even if it's some obscure item that, almost no one buys, well, if you destroy enough of them, then there's none of them in the wilderness, or in the Grand Exchange, right? And you need to move on to a different item, right? That's the big difference between my system and Bounty Hunter, is that for me, or at least for my system, if a weapon costs 1 billion points, that's essentially the same as costing 1 billion GP. There's 1 billion GP that needs to leave the game in the form of items there, right? So it's not the same thing at all. Again, I just used it because I thought it would be a good thing to compare it to a system that people are already familiar with, so they understand the similarities that can have, and in this case the similarities being it's an additional system, not a replacement for what's going on in the wilderness, especially because with my system, if I didn't specifically try and pass that idea, I think people would just assume that I was replacing what the wilderness is and what PvP in the wilderness is, which was not my objective at all. Next comment. What about having a point system that rewards players for targeting players or player killers more than PVMers? Say you get 1 point per person when you leave the wilderness, however, if that person has killed another person in the wilderness, you get the points they have. Similar to keys, but more of an incentive to hunt player killers. I actually used to have a kill streak mechanic, awarding certain points multipliers and such with my item sync. The reason I ended up not going ahead with it was fears of it just not being very satisfactory when implemented, especially considering it might be too close to a certain minigames function. I think it's an idea that you can explore with, actually having kills generate the points, but the problem is, and pretty much the same reason as Bounty Hunter got abused, when you can generate wealth out of nothing, especially when it comes to PvP, people will love to abuse that. Again, that's exactly why in my system the items get deleted from the game, because there's a trade-off there. Right, any system that you can generate essentially extra GP without putting anything into it is just gonna get heavily abused, and which is why most systems that do that don't tend to be very rewarding, right? Even when you're doing PVM, you need to spend supplies on, ammunition if you're using ranged, or charges for your Blood Fury or whatever. You need to spend food, potions. There's a certain trade-off that you are doing to generate wealth. Right, so any system that doesn't generate wealth directly, unless it's in a mini game, I can see it being very abused, which is why I kind of ended up taking away the skill streak mechanic, and I think it would just encourage players mostly to go after people that have a lot of points rather than specifically player killers. You would think that player killers end up having the most points, but I'm not so sure that's going to be entirely the case, or that that's going to be the incentive. So as a whole, I decided to just leave it aside, not use it, keep it mostly simple, but it's an idea that if you do explore it seriously and you make sure that there's a trade-off between, you getting kills or more points per kills, and you giving something up for it, I think it's an interesting system. I think you could make it work, but again, there needs to be a sort of trade-off to make it actually properly work. Next comment. Reasons. 1. The way combat works in old school RuneScape sucks for PvP. 2. It's way too easy to save every fight and teleport away or run. 3. The high risk idea is nonsense. Getting a skull is not punishing. PKers have an unfair advantage. 4. PvP bots will kill you 100% of the time. They have perfect prayer switching and can swap gear and spec faster than any human being. Personally, I have to disagree with the notion that the way combat works in old school RuneScape sucks for PvP. If anything, I think it has a lot more potential when compared to other MMORPGs. It's fairly easy to understand given its point-and-click nature, but it's very hard to master, which is usually what makes a good PvP game. And considering all of the roadblocks PKers have faced, and they still do PvP, I would say there's a certain appeal to it, and quite a big one at that. As for the bots being really good or being easy to save every fight or whatever, I mean, yeah, but you're in the wilderness, eventually you're gonna run out of food. You can make it so, what already happens, for example, in the Ferox Enclave, which is, if you're in combat, you cannot go into the Ferox Enclave, you cannot pass the portal, right? There's a lot of things like that you can make, a lot of little changes like this that you can make to not allow people to teleport or run away in the middle of a fight, if you want. So, overall, and the bots, I mean, yeah, while there are good bots, I think that anything that is a bot can essentially just be cheesed. If there's anything that I learned, especially from speedrunning, is if there's an AI involved, you can probably cheese it, right? Which is something that happens. So, and I don't think that most people would run I don't think that most bots are very competent bots at PvP. There are some, but I don't think it's such a widespread problem to the point where people can't PvP in peace. I just don't believe that to be the case. And even then, that's down to Jagex to fix it, more so than it is for us to be deprived of said content. As I said earlier, I don't see any reason as to why, just because a piece of content can be abused, especially by bots or whatever, that should keep us from introducing into the game. If there is a trade-off, and if, players enjoy it enough, and there's legitimate players enjoying said thing, why remove it, right? It's down to Jagex to actually ban the bots, not, us to be deprived of content because Jagex can't ban bots. Next comment. Chaos Altar can probably stay. It's actually a good escape if you bother to bring a Chaos Tally, and there are good non-PvP ways to enter it. I mean, sure, like, it's very niche though. It's really, really niche, to the point where I've never actually seen anyone do that. And honestly, with how close the ditch is to it, I don't think most people will bother sacrificing an inventory slot just to have a Chaos Tally, just to have that a little bit of an earlier escape. Again, in niche cases it might save you, but 99% of the times you're just wasting an inventory slot, right? I would wager that you would survive more times if you brought a restore, prayer pot, or even a bit of food, than if you bring a Chaos Tally to escape through there, right? And on top of that, it's a skilling activity, so I don't think we should keep it in the wilderness. Especially because of some niche case. Yeah, I get it, there's the Chaos Tunnels that you can use to get to the altar without going through the PvP zone. But who the fuck really uses that? Almost no one uses the Wilderness Altar, almost everyone collectively uses the fucking Abyss, right? The non-PvP one, it's such a niche case that it's just better to remove it, honestly, right? Like, the main purpose of the altar is to be an access point to craft runes, and that's what we should encourage people to do, and that's what we should encourage people to, or we should encourage its use to be, right? It doesn't make much sense for it to even be further as well than the Abyss. So overall, just take it out of the wilderness, make it closer to a bank or something, so people can actually use it as a viable way to craft Chaos Runes, rather than just being completely forgotten. Next comment. Without the Abyss, there should be an equally fast way to get to the Death Altar for clues and runecrafting. It's not even as good GP per hour as Blood or Nature runecrafting. I will even be interested in putting the Abyss somewhere else altogether. I'm not entirely against its concept, it's just that currently it serves pretty much zero purpose when it comes to PvP in the wilderness, and I think it makes a lot of other altars pretty much that content. I mean, the previous comment was about the Chaos Altar. Pretty much any altar that is further away from a bank than Edgefield Bank to the Abyss, pretty much that altar is that content, right? So I don't enjoy the idea of the Abyss too much, being unlockable at level 5 in crafting and being so closer to the bank than most other altars. I remember back then when I was crafting double cosmic runes, when that was a good rune crafting method to make GP. I remember I would use the cape, the quest cape, to teleport to Legends Guild, which had a fairy ring nearby, which then you would teleport to Xanaris, right? That was like a few seconds barely faster than just using the Abyss, right? And it required the quest cape. The Abyss requires level 5 rune crafting. So, I would rather making it an unlockable through runecrafting, or, place it somewhere else that requires, like, good teleport unlocks or whatever, for it to be the best option, right? Because usually you either want altars to be the fastest way to get there, and it's just that the Abyss is more convenient because it has every altar there, or you want altars to just be the first point of contact players have with the skill. The Abyss feels such a huge reward to just have accessible like this, purely under the excuse that it's in the wilderness. And again, you don't need all of the talismans to unlock it or whatever. I think that would be a cool thing, for example, if you want to unlock an altar through the Abyss, you need like a talisman to actually unlock the portal through the Abyss, right? Because right now, you can just circumvent a lot of what the runecrafting is when it comes to altars by just having the Abyss. Next comment. When understanding the wilderness's intent, you must understand the wilderness creation. It is not supposed to be Predator vs Prey. You must look at RuneScape Classic, my friend. Colonella's video explains better, but cliff notes are this. RuneScape Classic, everywhere was PvP, and you selected PK at character creation. A gang started killing real noobs, which robbed them. Another clan was created to protect the noobs. That made them anti-PKers, guardians of real innocent citizens that could not fight. They had a war, the PKers lost badly because there is no honor among thieves. Then Gower made the wilderness and restricted PvP. It has been dead ever since. If you want to fix it, you must make the real worlds like Dead Man, where outside cities is PvP dangerous, and guards are level to 50 and mess you up if you have a skull. This will create more opportunities for anti-PKers to climb up and protect people. These will revive PvP. I'm gonna be completely honest. What the fuck did I just read? Like, look, I understand that English is not everyone's first language. It's not my first language, that's for sure. But like, were you high when you wrote this? Because I don't even know, like, what the fuck? Right? Because, I mean, okay, let's actually try and dissect the comment and actually, like, try and explain what it wants us to do. So basically this comment says that for you to revive PvP, you need every normal world to be Deadman mode. Like, permanently, every world. Which already exists. Like, Deadman mode already has a permanent world that usually sees around less than 50 players, and has seen for years now. You know, it got slightly better with people being able to transfer their accounts after the seasonal Deadman modes, but people tend to lose interest very quickly. So I don't think that's gonna revive PvP, because otherwise it would have already revived PvP. In fact, one of the main reasons as to why PvP in the wilderness isn't very liked is because people want to do skilling in PvM without being bothered and PK'd. So I don't think this would revive PvP. I think people will just get upset enough and leave the game. I don't know, look. Okay, originally, PvP was enabled everywhere, given that a lot of MMORPGs back then were survival PvP ones. Like, that was just the norm. Most devs wanted to give players, I'm heavily summarizing here, it's not entirely like this, but most devs wanted to give players the ability to fight each other, and the easiest way to do it was just to make PvP everywhere, right? But that doesn't really make it better. There's a reason as to why pretty much any full PvP MMORPG tends to die very quickly. And I mean die, like a lot of full-on PvP looter MMORPGs tend to close servers and just straight up fucking retire because there isn't enough players in them. Simply because it's not a popular way to run an MMORPG. Why? Progression. MMORPGs are all about progression. And the thing is, if you are good at PvP in a, you know, game where everything is PvP, where everywhere is PvP, the better you are at PvP, the more items you get and the more access to areas you get, meaning it's not only harder for players coming up to fight you because you have better gear, you're also better than them. The odds are stacked against them, which doesn't make it very fun for them to fight you. This is one of the reasons as to why Deadman Mode had to make a lot of changes, like restricting what content you could access depending on the week that you were playing. Because otherwise, people were just like, camp certain spots that are incredibly important for your account's progress, and then you just fucked, basically. So, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I just, you know, this comment sounds like a fever dream. Anyway, next comment. Maybe you could make use of relics like in Deadman mode. This could give you small benefits depending on what you are doing, but you can only equip one relic at a time, and these relics are unlocked through PvP. Very good suggestion. I know that a lot of Deadman mode relics are actually super overpowered, because to be honest, it's a seasonal game mode, so of course they are overpowered. However, there is a possibility of tweaking them to make them more viable to be in the main game, and this could make PvP as a whole a bit more complex and deeper, with more moving parts, giving players even more choices with the character builds they have and whatnot. And, you know, these relics being earned through, be it the wilderness or like, I saw a post on Reddit with a new, like, wilderness content suggestions that mentions PvP, achievements, basically combat achievements, but for PvP. They could be earned through that, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be even wilderness PvP, it can be any PvP, right? Which essentially just gives even more PvP-centric content for the game, where you actually progress, you know? I would want these relics to be something that are more permanently unlocked, rather than being items you can equip and can lose or win against other players, because again, PvP just needs that progression there to sort of exist. Again, these relics shouldn't be anything super overpowered, just, you know, nice little things that can help you through PvP or whatever, right? So, yeah, I mean, it can be an interesting idea. Next comment. So I understand that this comment is a bit long, but I'm more interested in the idea proposal. So, idea proposal. Following these principles I laid out, here is one idea I'd like to hear people's thoughts on. What about a mob farm of some kind in a single target safe area where finding and killing another player allows you to bank/restock faster? Although I recognize that this could technically be abused if there was a small cost of dying, e.g. you lose an entry fee or a portion of the resources you farmed, but not your gear. These could offset the benefits of dying intentionally over just going back to the bank normally, because killing other players in and of itself is no longer the core source of resources. You can't artificially create a bot farm to kill each other endlessly like in Bounty Hunter to make money. Although you can bot the mobs, this is essentially just like any other bot farm at this point. To address the setup gap issue, perhaps the mobs need to be finished off with a special attack weapon in the same way you might fight a player. Maybe they recharge special attack energy upon death, but give reduced XP to avoid abusing this for crazy XP rates. This back recharge allows you to fight on even footing whenever engaged upon by another player, so that you're not caught up at a disadvantage with an empty special bar. Okay, yeah, that was a bit of a weird thing for me to read, because it's not very clear. Like, I don't think it's very clear or clearly explained, but so to try and because it's just very convoluted. Like, geez, when designing stuff, one of the things you have to keep in mind is to not overcomplicate systems, because otherwise players will have a hard time understanding them. And believe me, sometimes you can make like the most easy to understand thing and players won't still understand what the fuck you're talking about, right? So usually overcomplicated systems tend to not do very well in games, you know. Like, for example, with my key optional system that I created, a lot of people already felt confused it with Bounty Hunter, and that was somewhat of a straightforward system. It was literally, hey, you kill players, you get items, you can sacrifice some of those items when the player dies, so you don't get them, but you get points, and then you can access unique reward. That's what the entire system is, and some people already like struggled with understanding that, right? So yeah, this just seemed way too convoluted, and way too like I don't understand what the point of the comment was in terms of the ideal proposal. I think the idea proposed here was mostly just from a PvM perspective of killing mobs, but in unique ways. So you wouldn't have a PvP farm like you do for Bounty Hunter, or like you used to for Bounty Hunter, but then you just create a normal bot farm, which is what the Predator vs Prey content already does for the Wilderness. So I'm not a huge fan of a mob farm, especially one that it's like single target, because again, the core issue with Predator vs Prey culture is that culture essentially informs the updates that are done, or at least that are desired or seen good by the people taking part in it. This is why all of my suggestions have the focus on the gameplay being specifically, and rewards specifically coming from killing other players, since that's what I want to encourage, right? Yes, any system where you kill other players can be abused, but I don't think creating mob farms is a good idea to solve the problem with people abusing that, right? Because, yeah, and even furthermore, I don't want to take away from the PvP content that I made to be focused on PvM, which is kind of what the suggestion is suggesting here, because it's a mob farm, right? Because like what you are doing is you're trying to prevent PvP, you're trying to prevent PvP farming, right? Like in Bounty Hunter, with PvM farming. But that's not the point of the my suggestions. The point of my suggestion is that you do PvP. That's the point, because otherwise you're just encouraging Predator vs Prey. So I don't know, like maybe I just felt a bit confused by this comment. I don't know. Next comment. You just need to make a limit to how many people can attack you in the Wilderness. Shouldn't be any more than 2. Single target zones already exist in the Wilderness where only one other player can attack you, so that's already been done, even if they're not necessarily perfect. Furthermore, I don't think that denying the more chaotic and strategic parts of fighting in a team or fighting in a clan is actually healthy for the PvP scene. Clans and teams are part of the scene. They deserve their own opportunities and they deserve their own content. And right now one of the main issues is that actually they don't have any of that, right? So I think that limiting how many people can attack you in the wilderness just isn't very good long term, which is why I actually like the fact that there are single target zones and multi-target zones. I think that's honestly a good design despite how old it is. Next comment. For the wilderness a point system, you could potentially sacrifice items above XG value for, say, half of what it's worth, allows players to gear but still promotes PvP and ease, and removes items from the game. The amount of points the system gives to me was a bit irrelevant. As long as it's consistent, I don't really care too much, so half of the points would still work. I just left G value since it's much more comprehensible, like immediately by players, than saying that they have to think about, a certain item's value and then having to half it or whatever, right? So like, if you know that a Black Dehyde body costs 8k on the GE, if you see someone wearing it, oh, I'm gonna get 8k points at least, right? It's just much easier for players to grasp it than if they have to go, oh, it costs 8k, but okay, I'm gonna get 4k, and you're just adding steps to the mental process, which usually tends to degrade it. So I just left G value to be easier for players to understand, but as long as it's consistent, any amount of points pretty much works, right? You just need to make it somewhat simple and it being consistent. Next comment. Just recently died doing a boss in the wildy for the first time ever. I was jumped by like 10 different dudes in Mystics. LMFAO, I call them fucking nerds as I died. As funny as this comment is, it does show the problem of Predator versus Prey and how that just promotes toxicity between players. It's pretty much the perfect example of it. So yeah, that's why I'm including it. Next comment. My only gripe with the wilderness are the purists. If a level 70 sees another level 70, he will think it's a fair game, but in reality it's a purist who will out-DPS the normally leveled player with his 99 offense and 1 defense. Members may not have that bad of an issue, but in PvP, in free-to-play, I just read any little thing and I go, oh yeah, it's PvP, but no, it's free-to-play here. This is rampant and is often wiser to run away and log out than fight back. Maybe a spell that can scramble purist stats temporarily to equalize the stats with the person who casted the spell. It is a stretch, but as long as only viable options to PK is to be a purist in free-to-play, I don't think Predator vs Prey mentality will go anywhere, since free-to-play worlds give first impression of wilderness PvP in general. P.S. Why fight a losing fight if only victory is survival? Yes, that's usually one of the main issues with Predator vs Prey, even in members, is that why fight back when it's just much better to run away and the reward is just much higher if you survive than if you manage to kill the other player. So that's a problem that extends everywhere. But yeah, I actually never really touched on the account builds and pretty much I looked at it through a max combat lens, since that just made it much easier to explain the content and systems I was suggesting. Truth is, I don't really know how you solve this issue. Ideally, I would like to, eventually remove wilderness levels so players could all just fight each other and create a more, chaotic scenario, which is supposed to be the wilderness. But that would require a completely different wilderness culture, which I don't know if you'll ever achieve. I do find that an issue that players need pretty much entire different characters for certain PvP builds, and these aren't exactly cheap or easy to set up either, so, maybe we would need to have like a much more in-depth study on how players interact with building these accounts and what solutions that could have. Yeah, this spell could work, but personally I don't find this type of spell too nice, since it would completely kill the motives of the PKer to kill you. So, because essentially imagine you creating an account and working towards an account and then, all of the progress that you made just gets taken away because of one spell. I think it would kind of defeat the purpose of account builds. I think maybe a better idea would be to just sort of have the wilderness be a separate entity where you actually can choose which stats you have when going there, but at the same time, because you do have PVM and skilling content there, if you could set up any combat stats at all, most boarding issues in the wilderness would become much worse. So it's not a very good solution. Yeah, I don't know. It's just very hard to solve the issue of different account builds and whatnot. Honestly, I'm not entirely against some account builds just being purely for PvP worlds, right? Like pures or whatever, or, you know, whatever it is, right? That can work. It's just that, to me, you know, like, you need to give those players as well a form of progress, right? But yeah, I mean, that's one of the issues that comes with people being able to build certain account or certain account builds and whatnot, and it's an issue that, again, I don't know how to solve. But it's a very good thing that you brought up, and you know, it's something that you do need to look at in the future to make the wilderness even better. If the first step is to change the culture from Predator versus Prey to PvP, you know, the second step is then to figure out how to make the entire thing a bit more fair, especially when it comes to account builds. Next comment. Love the concept for the video, but I had a question that's been floating around in my head a while. I came over from World of Warcraft and used to do PvP arenas in WoW. Do you think there is a place for a ranked arena system in RuneScape? So like 1v1, 2v2 or 3v3 matches for rank to go towards a leaderboard and have some kind of other reward too. Thought it might be a good way for people to learn to PvP against real players without the RNG of LMS. Bring your own gear, save death and fight it out. Yes, actually there is. It's called the PvP Arena, and it's pretty much that content. I think the PvP Arena is honestly it's a very good example of what happens when you drastically change something without changing its culture. The Duel Arena was filled with people, sure, but it was filled with people that gambled. Like, that was the point, right? So when it was removed, no one cared for it anymore since you couldn't gamble anymore, and actual players or actual PKers never really went there to actually, you know, do PvP. So with no culture, it pretty much stays forgotten to this day. I do think the PvP arena has a lot of potential, especially with the esports side of the game, but Jagex needs to put a proper effort incentivizing players to PvP there. Host tournaments make it easier for people to host tournaments themselves, you know, being able to have good spectating tools, good organizational tools and everything. Pretty much what I talked about in my Deadman Mode video, I think, and what I said about the future of esports in RuneScape form. Do I think Jagex is gonna do it? Absolutely not. It would help PvP a lot. It would help PvP gain a different side as well, different cultures of it as well. I know there are a couple of players that do PvP in the arena, but, you know, I just don't think that it's right now prepared for anything bigger. Again, Jagex needs to put in a huge effort into it, and honestly, given when it comes to things like account security and everything, it doesn't seem that Jagex is putting a lot of effort into the parts that really matter about the game, never mind in creating a PvP scene. So, yeah, as much as that already exists, I don't think that without proper effort being put into it to create a culture surrounding it, that it's ever gonna be a viable place to PvP. Obviously, my video was mostly focused on PvP specifically in the wilderness, so it was a very specific thing, but yeah, it's a very good point, and thanks for bringing it up. Next comment, or comments. As long as AHKers and cheaters are not permanently banned and flagged, wildy will never get better no matter how good it is. About to put this in the background and listen, but my opening thought is there's no way Jagex can fix the wilderness because the PvP community will exploit and undermine every change, be it boring, AHK, corruption or exploiting. This is a very common sentiment I see time and time again. However, again, I think it's counterproductive. I don't believe, as I mentioned earlier, that we should deprive certain play styles of content purely because some people will cheat or abuse it. It simply doesn't really solve any of the issues, including the cheating. Secondly, the more attention something usually has, the more appreciated it is, the higher scrutiny people cheating and abusing will face, meaning Jagex will also try harder to have people not abuse it, since, you know, that's a thing that a lot of people care about, and people will grill Jagex if they don't do anything about it. A very good example of this is the Inferno. Since so many people care for it and it's this hugely prestigious thing, it's one of the things Jagex most pays attention to when it comes to the buying of services or the selling of services. So, you know, in reality, making the wilderness good will attract players wanting to engage with it and care for it, which in turns will push players to hold Jagex to a much higher standard when it comes to people cheating or abusing certain pieces of content. I'm not saying it's a foolproof plan, but I'm saying that it does play a role. And I mean, it's Jagex after all, so I don't really think it's a foolproof plan. I remember back when, like, this was like, what, the second version of Bounty Hunter or whatever, when that was being abused, people knew it was being abused for months before Jagex did anything, because people didn't care that much about it, right? Like, at least the vast majority of the player base didn't care that much about it, right? And that's the problem, is that when the vast majority of the community doesn't care, Jagex also doesn't need to care, and most of the times they don't even know it's going on. So, you know, making the wilderness more popular and making the wilderness a better place that people generally care about can be a very good way to, you know, have Jagex also care a little bit more about it. Again, it's Jagex, I don't think it's gonna be perfect, but it's really important. And again, I'm not gonna go into the argument of, oh, but it's gonna be abused, we shouldn't. I already talked about that previously, so yeah. Next comment. Honestly, wildy is all about risk/reward, and that dictates the meta. As a PvMer, it's usually better to not fight back, as you are already skewed against fighting a PvPer when most of your gear is based on killing a mob and the PvPer's gear is based on PKing. Taking extra gear to fight back against the PvPer as a PvMer just isn't worth it. People don't like being loot bags, but it's just not worth the added risk of bringing gear to fight back. Jagex needs to find a good balance of increasing the risk/reward for both parties. If it was riskier for PvPers to eat PvMers by giving PvMers some kind of buff to negate the power imbalance, then you bet a chunk of PvMers are going to start fighting back, because flipping the tables on a PvPer can be profitable. They could also give a buff to PvPers for PvP versus PvP fights by having them pop bots in highly botted areas like Ruined Dragons. In other games like MOBAs, the meta is always something shifting thanks to adjustments from developers to avoid things becoming stale. Old school RuneScape really hasn't done anything to shift the meta between PvP and PvPers, or PvM and PvPers, and thus we have the most efficient meta of loot bagging PvMers that generally don't fight back. Now, one of the just main issues that I find right away with this comment is the giving power for PvMers to fight back because it will make it more profitable. One of the main issues with the Predator vs Prey system in the wilderness, and the reason as to why PvMers don't fight back right now, is that it's simply way more profitable to not fight back. It's not even necessarily to do with the risk, because you can bring very cheap PvP gear. Solid robes, mystics, black d'hide are more than enough to eat pretty high numbers, especially if you are maxed, you know, against a PKer. That's not the problem. The problem is it's always and will always be more profitable to kill a monster and run away when you're being attacked than to fight back. So I don't think this kind of buff would really change anything, and why would you have a buff like this to begin with? Like, why are you rewarding PvMers with PvP when they don't want to PvP? That's why they're doing PvM. And furthermore, I just think there's better ways of doing it. I said as much in my video. There was a thing where you can stack monsters in order to give you damage buffs in the wilderness. That's one of the rewards I talked about. It's a small reward, but I don't think that reward alone is gonna change the way PvMers and PvPers look at the wilderness. There are also a couple of other issues. First, I purposefully wanted to shy away from rewarding PvMers. This essentially means I don't want PvMers to be a frequent occurrence in the wilderness, since that just encourages further behavior of Predator vs Prey, because you have a lot of PvMers going to the wilderness to PvM. This is, even if you make it easier for PvMers to fight back, I still don't want them in the wilderness, because they're PvMers. I want PvMers in the wilderness that want to go there, because they want to specifically be in the wilderness. They want to specifically PvM in a PvP zone, which is not the case for the vast majority of PvMers. The vast majority of PvMers go to the wilderness because it's simply much more profitable to be in the wilderness, and then once a PKer shows up, to not fight back than to fight back. They aren't PvPing, they're PvMing, and these are two different activities, and, you know, players will always feel a certain amount of aversion to switching activities on the fly. This is why I try to design content that would create situations where the main risk and the main reward was fighting and killing other players. That's where the focus should be. At that point, even if people are PvMing, like in the Shapeshifter boss for example, they don't go there to PvM necessarily, they went there to PK. Therefore you don't need an extra incentive to PvP while PvMing. I think that is just honestly complicating things, especially with a buff which probably just doesn't really feel very fair for PKers. Secondly, while I understand wanting to give PKers boosts against bots, how do you define who is a bot? Because if Jagex knows a player is botting and as a result they're gonna give you a boost against them, isn't it just much better to just outright ban them? Next comment. Wilderness content is extremely easy for how high the reward is. I am not a PKer, but I have 50 million Slayer XP, almost all done in the Wilderness. It is extremely profitable that it really doesn't matter if I lose 300k per death. It takes 10 minutes to earn that back, doing basically any content in the Wilderness. The threat of being PK'd is what made it fun for me. Getting drops like Imbued Art or Voidwaker Gem in the Wilderness is way more thrilling than getting similar priced items in a safe zones. It is a mind shift though that is required to let go of the attachment to losing items, but if you do Wilderness content, you can easily make hundreds of meals per week, that money doesn't matter anymore. Given some of the comments I already went through and comments later in this video, I think it is pretty clear that while this is fun for you, it's not fun for the vast majority of the players. It's important when designing content or making decisions to understand how players, in general, feel about things and act towards things. When it comes to the Wilderness, the vast majority of players just hate the Predator vs Prey design, and the fact that you can make so much GP without losing much is exactly why one of the main points of my video was that it simply wasn't high risk high reward. Like, you being able to make so much GP without risking barely anything, that's not a good thing. That's one of the problems I highlighted. That's what causes the Wilderness to be an hotspot of botting when it comes to PVM. Next comment. Pretty hard views for someone whose Wilderness boss KC doesn't show on high scores. Only about halfway through the video. Instantly disqualifying yourself with a disclaimer. That's wild. Now, I'm gonna be honest because I think that the first comment actually isn't saying anything negative. I think the first comment can be essentially seen as like positive or negative depending on how you look at it, but the second comment is obviously clearly negative. Now here's the thing, this is a sentiment that I see so many times people have when it comes to video games, especially RuneScape 3. I know that this video is about old school RuneScape, but RuneScape 3 is especially bad when it comes to this. I'm not saying that everyone does it, but it's a massive issue. Basically, people don't understand that designing content and playing it require two different types of skill sets. Sure, look, it's useful to know both if you can, because ultimately what's gonna happen is that if you are designing something and you know how to play it and you know how players play it, you'll have a better understanding on how to design it better. Sure, skills can inform each other. However, they're not directly transferable, meaning just because you play a lot of video games doesn't mean you are good at making video games. Just because you are good at making video games doesn't mean you're good at playing video games, or that you even understand how to do that. And that is a thing that a lot of players just don't really grasp for some odd reason. So to me, it's completely irrelevant if I am good at PvP or not. Like, me being good at PvP doesn't take away from the experience I have designing stuff for the game. This is not the first video I've made designing content, neither is the second at this point, and I've made a lot of videos explaining the design of the game, especially the design of skilling and the macro design of RuneScape and everything, so I have a lot more experience designing things than your average PvPer, which is why if I were to ask PvP players to design content, I can promise you that most of the content they would design wouldn't be as good as mine. Because they don't have the experience designing content, they have the experience playing the content. Which is why if I were to play the content myself, I probably would be shit at it compared to the people that play the content. Again, while these skills can inform each other, or while these skill sets can inform each other, they're not transferable directly. You know, take this for example, just because you're really good at driving a car doesn't mean you're a good mechanic, right? Yeah, it's probably useful for a driver to understand how a car functions, and it's probably useful for a mechanic to understand, you know, how you drive a car, but that doesn't mean that your experience being a mechanic is in driving the car, or vice versa, right? They can be skills that can take information from the other side, but your experience is still in the main thing. So if your experience is playing the game, you'll have a lot of experience playing the game. If your experience is in designing content, you'll have a lot of experience designing content. So I'm not disqualifying myself because I'm saying that I'm not a PKer. If anything, I'm distancing myself from the entire situation. When I said that I'm not a PKer, what I meant with it was to signal to people watching the video that I have no stake in this race. I don't care. Like, if the wilderness leaves, if the wilderness dies, if the wilderness has PvP, if people like PvP, I don't care. That doesn't affect me, right? So me saying that I'm not a PvP player, right, that I'm not a PKer, I'm not disqualifying myself. I'm simply stating to people that, A, I'm not biased when it comes to any of this, because I don't care for it. Because that's one of the major issues that I see players have when it comes to sending suggestions, especially to JMods, when they play the game. Which is, if I do a lot of skilling, I will be very biased towards how I want skilling to be done, because I do a lot of it. In fact, when I made my with carrying expansion video, one of the things that I had to try and do was take a step back from how I would like to do with carrying into, okay, what did players actually respond well to? Which is why the call to action mechanic was introduced. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a huge fan of call to action mechanics in RuneScape 3, especially not in skilling methods. But a lot of people are. People respond really well to those mechanics. People love those mechanics. You know, to me it's like, yeah, it's nice, it's there, whatever, but I don't care about it too much, right? But people really do. People responded really well, especially with the mining and smithing rework. People love the call to action mining mechanic, so much so Jagex introduced it to construction at the fort, so it's pretty clear people liked it. That's why I decided to introduce it, or to put it in my with carrying expansion video. When you are so close to a piece of content, it's so easy to be biased towards it. And the thing is, if I were to be biased when it comes to the wilderness, the vast majority of my content discussions and my content suggestions that I would do in that video wouldn't be related to PvP. They would be related with taking away PvP from the wilderness. Because I want to be able to do some content that is in the wilderness in the future without being in a PvP zone. If I were to be disqualifying myself, I would be biased towards that. And furthermore, the experience you have at doing something, to me, is irrelevant when designing content. You can have zero experience designing content and still design something that is really good. To me, what matters is the quality of what you designed, not what your accolades are. Your arguments are much more important than whatever you have to back them up, in the sense of, oh, but I'm a PKer, that's why I know what's best for PvP. No, really. Like, I'm gonna judge what you suggested. I don't care if you're a PKer or not. I want to care about what you suggested specifically, and or how is that going to interact with players. So, to me, it's completely irrelevant if you have 10,000 kills or 0. Next comment. Introduce a new area called the Unholy Lands, where overheads don't work. Make it easier for people with less skill to use only 1 or 2 attack styles, instead of needing to be a pro tri-breather to compete. While I see the appeal of this, at the same time, one of the main motivators that make you switch gear mid-fight are the protection prayers. But I do see how this could help people get more into PKing. I mean, even during PVMing, having to walk, heal, switch gears, switch prayers can be completely overwhelming. To the point where I remember Void being a very popular choice when it came to people that were learning Zora, so they would get accustomed to, the skill of switching gear mid-fight, because it's not as overwhelming having to switch an helm and a weapon versus having to do like 8-way switches. So yeah, I mean, I can see this idea being a good idea. I don't know if an entire land would be the right approach, since I think it would seem a bit arbitrary to just having your prayers disabled there, but as a concept, being a middling stepping stone to allow less skilled players to try out and improve at PKing, it's 100% a nice idea. You could do a little quest with it, you could introduce this in the Duelist Kingdom that I did, you could introduce this into the arena. There's a lot of ways they can introduce this in better ways, but the idea itself is really nice. Next comment. I will stand by my stance that PvP should be isolated into PvP worlds. The wildy should be a place where it's high risk, high reward, with most dangerous things in the game always on aggression, and just all the things are roaming, the revenants and the bosses. In my section of removed ideas, I gave the RuneScape 3 specifically other things that they had in the wilderness, and my reasons as to why I didn't end up pursuing that any further. Because the thing is, RuneScape 3 tried this exact thing, and people weren't huge fans of it, including me. Which is why that was just removed shortly after. Yes, in theory it's amazing, right? Like, oh, you know, you have an area that is highly dangerous, you need to be well prepared to go to and everything. In practice, it's completely fucking annoying. I remember I was doing a shooting star next to Mage Bank, and I just had constantly like getting damaged by the wilderness projectiles, the volcano projectiles that I had. And then they would spawn dragons, and I would die, and I would have to go all the way back just to keep mining a fucking shooting star. In theory, this is an amazing idea. In practice, I can promise you, it's so fucking annoying to have to deal with it. Besides, I don't want to quit on PvP in the wilderness, as I feel it has the potential to be something unique that you can't really have on a PvP world. I don't think PvP world should be the entire substitute for PvPing in the wilderness. I think it's okay to have different PvP scenarios, such as, you know, for example, the PvP arena, which focuses more on ranking and specifically 1v1s, than, you know, PvP worlds or the wilderness, which tend to focus, PvP worlds focus more on 1v1s but obtaining loot, while the wilderness focus more on the chaos of the region. Next comment. I know you prefaced this by saying that you are not a PvPer, but I had to hop off when you said that the agility course needs removal because it doesn't incentivize PvP. You couldn't be further from the truth after the most recent update. There are frequent clan wars that happen there. Now, given that this was a few weeks ago, I checked, there isn't that much activity there anymore, because, you know, that's usually what tends to happen. I'm not gonna go over why, you know, me saying that I'm not a PvP or whatever. I already addressed that in the other comment above. You know, again, it's just to signal that or at least I'm more from an unbiased perspective than, you know, me being too close to the action. But essentially, what is happening in the moment with the Wilderness Agility course, because let's say that there's still, you know, a clan war, there's 3 clan wars every day, right? That is exactly what happened with every single other wilderness update in the past 10 years. It has a lot of activity because it's new, and then as the time goes on, people stop PKing there because, well, something more shiny showed up and there isn't an actual PvP incentive to go there. I've seen this happen with the OG wilderness bosses, with the Abyss, with the resource area, with the Fountain of Ruin, with Black Shins, with Revenants, with reworked wilderness bosses, with Chaos Altar, with Wilderness Slayer, and I could go on and on and on and on. Specifically, or especially, with Revenants. It was such a big issue, some clans were actually charging PVMers to enter so they wouldn't get instantly PK'd. Now tell me, which one of these, still, to this day, sees full-blown clan wars, or activity for that matter? Almost none of them. That's the problem with putting IGP sources in the wilderness. The shine drops off, but the GP stays there, further ruining the economy and the value of items, even though they are no longer fulfilling their purpose. At the same time, Jagex needs to increase the GP rewards for new content to be better than what the current wilderness content has, further spiraling things out of control. This is one of the main issues with the current content in the wilderness, and I think I made that clear. Give it 5 years and the Wilderness Agility course will be as popular as it was before this update, simply because it doesn't actually encourage or reward clans for fighting there. Same thing is going to happen. To me, it's irrelevant what's happening right now, since that wasn't my argument in the video. My argument is that these updates haven't proved themselves to be satisfactory or even sufficient at holding PvP attention, and looking at how popular old wilderness content is, I would say I'm right on the GP with this one. You know? But hey, at least this was nice to show the exact fallacy I talked about like 2 comments ago. I might not be a PKer. And again, that's irrelevant to my arguments, since the arguments themselves that make up my designs. It's not my experience that makes up my design. Next comment. I don't think the point system fix makes much sense. If I'm a PVMer with no PvP skills, I'm trying to complete my log. Why would I spend dozens or hundreds of hours getting good enough at PvP to actually earn 100 million points, instead of just giving my friend 100 million and PKing him to buy out the store in 2 minutes? The collection log wasn't really on my mind when making this video, this store, or any of the content for that matter. Personally, I don't care if the items are on the collection log or not. And yes, you can just do that. Just keep in mind I've seen people end years-long friendships over last GP. Ultimately, yeah, I mean, it's an option, but it's like boosting anything, you know, it's like boosting LMS or Chambers of Xeric or whatever. If the game has anything good to offer, services will exist. That to me, however, is irrelevant since most people simply aren't going to afford them anyway. Not a lot of people will have 100 million GP to throw at their friends so they can complete the collection log. So I doubt that no one will feel incentivized by said system. Again, we're falling into this fallacy of, well, I do things this way, therefore they only work this way. But that's not how people behave. Also, the point system is to encourage those who already want to get into PvP, but have no incentives to do so. With a point system, they have some ways of tracking their progress, and with more content they also have some ways of even getting into it to try some different things out. Lastly, it's a bit disingenuous to only look at the point system itself. The point system came alongside wilderness unlocks, wilderness content which has its own unique rewards, mind you. Synergy between content and systems are usually used together to incentivize players towards something. It's not a singular thing that will. Next comment. 1. PKers want to go there, but PVMers and skillers don't. Neither way to lure PVMers and skillers into wilderness. Most AFK and lucrative mid and early money makers should be in the wild. 2. Create more content to attract non-old school RuneScape gamers to the game. 3. Increase drop rate of close scrolls, pet, raw resources, uniques, noted loots. 4. Need more group parties for organized boss raids. 5. If you're botting, players can summon a monster with a monster scroll to poison or teleport you to a maze, complete it in 3 minutes and you resume your activities with a 1-2 hour immunity from Force Tele, fail it and you get randomly teleported into the wilderness. First up I want to start with the botting portion, because again, if Jagex knows a player is a bot, isn't it just better for you to ban them? Because like, especially nowadays, I think you can easily program a bot to beat a maze. Like I don't think it's gonna stop bots. And don't you think that this scroll will actually just straight up rag innocent players? Like I can see a lot of abuse coming from this type of scroll. So look, when it comes to bots, the first thing that you need to think of, and the only thing you need to think of, is if your suggestion starts with if someone is a bot, the follow-up should be ban them, because that's the easiest way to deal with them. As for the rest of the comment, no, like that's antithetical to pretty much everything I mentioned in the video. Increasing loot isn't going to make more people want to come to the wilderness, since their issue isn't the amount of drops they get. In fact, most bosses in the wilderness have loot tables that make them feel like a private server. This isn't going to make the problem worse, or this is going to make the problem worse, not better. Which is what I mentioned in the video. So, no, don't make the wilderness even more lucrative for non-PvPers, because that hasn't worked in the past 10 years. It's not going to work now. Next comment. As a sea logger and pet hunter, there's no reason to create duplicates for wilderness bosses unless it's specifically so Iron Man can get the items from PVM. Maybe the solution is duplicating the items PVMers need, but that's all the items basically. But as wilderness bosses are bad standalone content, the challenge and the reward for most players is the fact that the bosses are in the wilderness. If Scorpio wasn't in the deepest part of the wilderness, if you didn't get slammed by PKers the whole way through, would the pet even be worth having? I think it's a negative when you're forced to go out of the wilderness with content like loose scrolls, the one just cheats random GP like agility, but I think engaging in Predator vs Prey is extremely thrilling even when you don't fight back. Escaping PKers is one of the most enjoyable things you can do, and getting better at it, getting familiar with the landscape, is the current progression for new players. In my opinion, the wilderness needs more requirements, including quests, which can be labeled as mini-quests, no mess with quest cape, more safe zones, pref with banks, more ways to escape, and more ways to manage your risk versus reward. I also think your reward space was kind of a mess, especially with the rewards sporadically coming from player kills based on how much your opponents risked. I think the most obvious reward space would be some form of corrupted weapons like present in Deadman mode. Untradeable versions of already existing PvP weapons would give immense value to PKers without ever adding GP directly to the game. Alright, look, if any part of the video was a mess, was the beginning section, as I had to rewrite them multiple times, and even then I still feel that I didn't come out exactly how I wanted in them. If anything, my reward space is by far the cleanest thing in the entire video, so I don't know how you managed to find it a mess, especially because you only talked about the additional optional key loot point system and not pretty much every other bit of content, which makes me think you didn't watch the entire video. As for the corrupted weapons, I kinda dislike them. For the most part, you're just gonna be devaluing the weapons that aren't corrupted to begin with, and even then, even with the corrupted weapons, what's stopping you from just creating new and exciting PvP weapons altogether? Like, why bother developing, content for corrupted weapons when you can just have the real weapons? Especially because the corrupted weapons in Deadman mode aren't exclusively PvP weapons. You also have the corrupted Twisted Bow and the corrupted Scythe, which aren't PvP weapons, so you'd be devaluing those as well. So I don't think that this is entirely a good idea. As for the value of the Wilderness boss pets, yes, it would still be worth having the pet. Like most pets, even the Kraken, are still really loved by people because getting a pet is getting a pet. And if the bosses are bad standalone content, I can 100% tell you they are even worse with PKers bothering you. Again, just because you find Predator vs Prey a good thing, does not mean most people do, and if that is your thing, that can still be your thing even with my updates. I'm just giving people more reasons to smack you all the way through. Next comment. You admit to never PKing, why make a video talking about, or Jesus fucking Christ, I can't read anymore. Why make a video talking out your bum about something you don't understand? You say that the Wilderness has no progression, you are right, but why is that a bad thing? You know what is fun, or you know what it is? Fun. You know why I hate PvM? It's boring and the exact same thing every time. Pot up, kill boss, tally out, repeat until reach. Then what? PKing on the other end is fun, it's random, it's exciting, you never know if that PvMer has 2k ether in his weapon or 15k. I've killed a random guy with 10k house stabs, why would he have that much? He didn't need that much, it was awesome to see that. Or specking out a PKer for his AGS, smiting other PKers, all sorts of great things. That's not even including the other PK clans that we have massive fights with on a weekly basis. You clearly have no idea what you're talking about and just want to make the Wilderness into something that is already very common in the game. It is unique and fun the way it is, leave it alone. Now, something that I didn't respond to the earlier comment, that this comment also talks about is the progression. So the earlier comment talked about progression in the terms of skill level, which I've already talked about, but this comment says there's no progression. So, back to back, hey, there's progression, there's no progression. So yeah, why would I want to change the Wilderness? It's unique and fun. Okay, it's unique and fun for you. It's not unique and fun for the vast majority of players. And besides, from your comment and from what you are talking about, what you find unique and fun pretty much tells me that a lot of my suggestions will be really fun for you, for the type of content that you like to see, because I'm creating content where you get rewarded and you get scenarios where you get rewarded for killing other players and seeing what loot they have, which is really fun. Something tells me you didn't watch the video until the end. Again, I understand, hour and a half video, but if you're gonna leave a comment talking about how I don't understand something, try and watch the entire video first. And again, I'm not gonna go over the comment yet again, because, but, oh, you don't know what you're talking about because you don't do it. I watch videos, I've researched the video quite a bit, I've gathered opinions from both PKers and PVMers. I can tell you, I've been on Reddit, yeah, I went to the depths of fucking Reddit to try and understand, okay, is there an issue? Is there not an issue? I do my due diligence when making these videos because I want to create content that is fun and useful for the game. So I might not be taking part in it, but that does not mean that I don't know what I'm talking about. Next comment. I honestly think it's such an easy fix, like just add ranked and casual matches, O-O, it's really not that complicated and you can add capes or something so people can show off the rank and boom, that's it. To the Wilderness. Like, we're talking about the Wilderness here. Like, how would you even have rank to the Wilderness? I'm going to be charitable and say that this comment meant PvP in general, and like create an actual PvP elo system rather than the wilderness, which I already talked about with the comment of the person from World of Warcraft. But you can do this you can do this in the wilderness, but you'd have to fundamentally change how the wilderness works. I'm just so confused. Next comment. Too many worlds. Restrict going into wildy to like 10 worlds and ta-da. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that you didn't watch the entire video. Because if you did, you would realize that I thought about doing this, and it was in the part of the video called removed content. I wonder what removed content means. Oh yeah, it means I didn't talk about it, as in like I didn't mention it for the video itself. I talked about it, and I talked about the reasons as to why I didn't do it. But just please, I know the video is really long, but please watch the video until the end, please. Next comment. Hell no, this is the very thing that killed PvP before OSRS. You're proposing something similar, which is dumb. I'd rather have the other players' loot. A reward system is stupid, this isn't a minigame. Not only is the reward system an optional added reward system that you can opt in and out of, that is pretty much the equivalent of getting other players' loot anyway. This is not even what killed PvP. Like, what killed PvP was the fact that the wilderness stopped being a PvP zone. As in, you couldn't kill other players anymore. My reward system is so far away from that I'm genuinely astonished you think that's a comparison. Like, I get that people are wary at any changes made in the wilderness or PvP in general, but if anything, my changes are adding PvP, not removing it. I'm adding more ways people can do PvP. I'm adding more rewards for PvP, not less. How did you even look at the video and went, nah, yeah, this person wants to remove PvP and kill it? What? Next comment. Spoken like a true PvMer who hates the wild. And yet the other person said my boss KC didn't even show up in the high scores? So which one is it? I'm a true PvMer or I'm no PvMer at all? Jokes aside, no, I don't hate the wilderness. While yes, it annoys the fuck out of me, honestly, especially because I have to re-gear every time I want to fucking do a close scroll. It's really just a fucking annoyance to me. If I really hated the wilderness, why would I waste 2 months of my life working on the video, working on the changes of the video, and not only did I work on the video, I incentivized more PvP? If I'm a PvMer that hates the wilderness, and as a result, by extent, hates PvP, why the fuck did I spend time making more PvP content? Like, I understand, again, people are wary of the changes that certain pieces of the game, especially PvP and the wilderness, can have, but watch the video. Watch the video, because if you watch the video, you'll very quickly realize that, that a lot of these content suggestions are about killing players and getting loot for killing players. That's very interesting. Really a true PvMer that hates the wilderness. Next comment, or sets of comments. So, because these comments all pretty much touch on the same thing, I'm not gonna read them, but essentially, the gist of it is that what these comments are asking for is that the wilderness shouldn't be a place where you lose your items. So, it's still a PvP place, but you only lose the items you have, like, gather in the wilderness, rather than losing your gear. One of the commenters even went on to make sort of a pseudo-roguelike experience for it. Personally, I think it's an idea that can be explored. It sounds interesting enough, it has a lot of potential, and given that 4 different people are expressing it, I think there's enough interest for it. So basically a wilderness, but if you die, you only lose the loot that you have and not the gear. While it is an interesting idea, however, for the wilderness itself, I don't want this. As much as I hate the best PKer sometimes, it is true that one of the biggest appeals is seeing what loot you actually get from killing another player. So, That's why I kinda want more PvP rather than less. Again, maybe as a standalone area of the game that is also PvP, but hey, again, it gives PvP a different profile. It gives it a profile of getting loot from other players rather than losing your gear. Again, it's interesting. I'm not against different ways of doing PvP. In fact, I welcome them, but not as a change to the wilderness. Next comment, or sets of comments. Yeah, so when I say that people hate the Predator versus Prey, I really mean it, because while there are some people that enjoy it, clearly a lot more people hate it. It's actually wild to see how many people suggested an opt-in, opt-out system like the one that you have in RuneScape 3. I think it's very obvious why this is a bad idea. While RuneScape 3 does work like this, and unfortunately there, PvP pretty much went from no one really PKs to no one actually PKs. Like, the PvP community in RuneScape 3 was already small, after that it got even worse. The reason why so many people went it, however, is that most content in the wilderness is focused on skilling and PvM. So the solution for those who engage with said content is to just opt out of the content they don't want to do, which in this case is being the prey for PKers, aka engaging in PvP content. This is a good example of what's wrong with the Predator versus Prey mentality. The people you are attracting don't want to be there, and honestly, if given the opportunity, will make you not want to be there either, which, you know, in this case, means that you can't PK anymore. This is why the content and rewards in the wilderness should be focused on PvP. You are attracting people whose interest is PvP, and you give them PvP content and rewards, so they stick around and feel satisfied with the content provided to them. And most of the content from that point forward is content that provides PvP to PvP players. This is why a culture shift is so important in the wilderness, is to change the majority of opinion while also giving content to PvP players which so desperately need it. Because if you don't do that and you leave it to, you know, trying to essentially engage PvMers and skillers to come into the wilderness, guess what content they're going to suggest? Exactly, they're going to suggest content that doesn't revolve around PvP, that kills PvP and hurts PvP. A culture shift right now is incredibly important when it comes to the wilderness. And those were all the comments. I mean, not all of the comments, I only included some of them. Pretty much the ones that I wanted to respond to, or the ones that I found interesting enough. So I would definitely recommend going to read all of them, since there were some neat ideas around there. I understand the comments were going to be way worse given the topic, because wilderness. So I'm glad to see that the reception of the video was good, and that people not only enjoyed it, but also found the ideas to be perhaps a bit more unique and fresh than the old tired, well, wilderness rejuvenation type content updates that the wilderness has had for the past 10 years, which really have only done a good job at souring people's opinions towards PvP and destroying the economy. So yeah, I am really glad that people didn't go south and completely started flaming each other. And while yes, there were, you know, one or two comments putting in question my credentials of not being a PvPer, and as a result I can't come up with good content for PvP or for the wilderness, the vast majority did seem to enjoy the video quite a bit. So yeah, anyway, if you want to watch more RuneScape related content, especially when it comes to the game design portion of it, don't forget to fucking subscribe. Just look, I have had so many views and so much watch time throughout my 2 years on YouTube, or at least the 2 years that I'm doing right now. I don't have this fucking subscribe, alright? Look, I'm not gonna let you go away from this video without just fucking subscribe. That's all I'm asking. That's all I'm asking. It's free. It's free. It's free. I mean, for now. Maybe YouTube in the future will make that feature paid, but right now it's free. Subscribing is free. So yeah, I don't know if I'll ever grab the wilderness stuff ever again. I think it all depends if I feel like, you know, grabbing it again or not, but you know, there's always a possibility to come back and touch even on more things surrounding the wilderness and suggest even more content for it. So yeah, my next video is actually going to be on a engineering rework, so if you enjoyed the wilderness video and you enjoyed content suggestions and stuff like that, I would definitely stay around for that one, because it's pretty much the same thing, except instead of the wilderness, it's for the engineering.